In this channel, we've talked a lot about the subgenre of cyberpunk, which is particularly one of my favorites when we talk about Japanese productions, especially in animation. But what about the famous genre of mecha, where we have the famous fighting giant robots that usually can be piloted by humans or not? And it was during my travels to the far past with productions that are long forgotten that I stumbled into a movie that falls precisely in the category of mecha. Gunhed from 1989. Directed by Masato Harada, this is an American/Japanese production by the major studio Toho, production company of the biggest tokusatsu franchise. Of course, Godzilla. So if you remember the old Godzilla movies that used a lot of practical effects with maquettes and giant puppets for the scenes of destruction, this is exactly what Gunhed brings. But here is a mixture of mecha and tokusatsu. And right away I will say that this movie is a gem of the practical effects with incredible visuals. But the story itself is a little truncated and even a little confusing. The movie already starts with two things that I believe are kinda lazy in any picture, or at least a lazy way to contextualize the story for the viewer. Lettering on black screen, so that everyone can read the backstory of the adventure. So the lettering explains the backstory of the universe, and on top of that we have a narration right after. So the screenwriter was not content in giving us a lettering, he also needed a narration to explain a little more of the backstory. That is basically about a highly advanced installation in an island in the middle of the ocean, and it was created by the human beings as a development base for automated machines. A great factory of machines controlled by artificial intelligence. And even though the island had some staff of humans working there, the artificial intelligence called Chiron 5 obviously decided that these humans were useless and took control of the island for itself, killing everybody. Then big potencies dispatched the Gunhed Battalion. That is basically an army with these huge tanks that are the main protagonists of the movie to battle Chiron 5 in the island. And this battle is basically a copy of the future war in the Terminator, of the humans against Skynet, and some elements of Aliens from James Cameron. And since I basically love both of these movies, I was a little bit, I don't know. But then I was also intrigued by the visuals of this movie. But all of this is the backstory of the main plot here in Gunhed. That is about this pirate crew that travels to the island, that after the big battle that happened in the past, nobody really knows what happens over there, and they are here to steal microchips or anything that they can take back with them and get some money. This crew is formed by 7 people, but the only one who you really need to know is Brooklyn, this guy who loves to eat carrots and play with guns. We know just a few things about him in the beginning, but basically he's this guy with a cool hair and is not a fan of piloting any vehicles or any tanks. So we all know where this is going. And I say it's only necessary to know him because the rest of the crew is decimated in the first 10 minutes of the movie, in such ways that are very difficult to understand because of bad editing. What it is implied is that the automated technology of the island is killing everybody one by one. But the editing is so bad that we cannot really tell what's going on. For those who have a lack of attention just like me, know that I also suffered to understand who did die, who is still alive, what's going on. This is where they find a very attractive soldier that was trapped in the island called Nin, and she was on a mission to obtain a substance that was used to fuel artificial intelligence, but her chopper was shot down and her partner was killed. In the end, there's only her and Brooklyn that have to join forces to escape the island, and also join forces with 2 children that are in the islands without much explanation, one called 7 and the other that is called 11. Then they're gonna split in pairs to try to escape the island. On Brooklyn's side, he's gonna stay in a graveyard of machines in the islands, working with the child 7. And this is where he's gonna find a carcass of an old Gunhed tank unit, deactivated. And with his skills, he's gonna try to resurrect this unit which is an exceptional war machine. Plus, it has an artificial intelligence that talks back to the pilot. And I took all this time to tell the story of the movie because it really is very truncated and with some problems of editing that really makes you lost during the whole first act. But like I said, the movie visuals started to attract me more and more during the story. And this is where it comes an argument that I sometimes make about the whole idea of movies. That a movie not necessarily has to be perfect in order to get you intrigued and excited about what's happening. Because after the character Brooklyn finds this Gunhed, which is basically the Mecha robot of this movie, which can be piloted in two ways, with him standing almost like a robot, or with him sitting like a tank, and starts to work in the machine in a huge montage that is kinda slow actually, to be able to resurrect it. The movie starts to gain momentum, bringing this mixture of tokusatsu with mecha. And when the machine gets ready for combat, then my friends, the movie becomes everything that I love in these old sci-fi lost classics that use practical effects. A visual effects showfest with the machinery of the tank moving in a very industrial setting, which for my taste is a feast for the eyes. And then I became completely engulfed by the second act of the movie showing the Gunhed in action, displaying many capabilities like cables to make it climb the walls or aquatic mode to make it dive in an oil river on a section of a tunnel, with weapons like machine guns or rockets, and the sound design of these weapons is very powerful. All of this brings an old, wonderful feeling of lost cinema art. The art of maquettes, animatronics, explosions, and sparks created practically. Everything that the company Toho was a master in crafting this art. All of this is complemented by this dark and bluish photography that highlights the industrial elements of the sets. Whoever likes this kind of production design, these maquettes that I mentioned, all the scenarios of the island and the tower that the characters are trapped in, is a feast for the eyes for the old machinery. Dirty, covered in oil, plus this light fog that gives the idea of an abandoned location. And as a fan of these old visual effects, even though the movie had all these previous flaws, I fell in love. And I was completely hooked by all these elements together. So I was very glad to discover this old gem, which, like I said, all the elements surrounding the mecha and the tokusatsu idea are very flawed. I mean, the characters are not bad, the story itself is not bad, but the way it is told is not memorable. So it's not a plot that will remain in your memory after you watch it. But all these practical effects scenes, especially the ones that Brooklyn has to pilot the Gunhed through the sections of the tower, and the final confrontation that is to get teared up of so much beauty with the fight of the Gunhed against the main machine of the island, the Aerobot, which is another kind of Gunhed tank that fights the real Gunhed in the end. This is a scene that brings the great vibes and feelings of the Godzilla movies when we had a fight between the two monsters in the middle of the city, filled with destruction, things crumbling, exploding. It's a visual chaos in the best sense of the word, and the most beautiful thing is everything practical. No CGI or digital effects that transform images in movies today in something that looks like a vomit on the screen, losing the sense of real machinery and its weight that is crucial to make the whole thing look credible for the viewer. Of course, I do like movies like Pacific Rim, but I cannot forget to appreciate movies like Moon 44, one of the first pictures directed by Roland Emmerich, or Robot Jox. Of course, these movies didn't have the assets of computer-generated images, but barely they knew that when they used these classic techniques, everything was much more magical. So movies like Gunhed remain cult classics that of course is very flawed, but if you like these elements that I mentioned in the video, this is a great one for you, especially because it should be remembered more for the great B-movie example that it is. Apparently, there are those who do. James Cameron is said to have mentioned that Gunhed is one of his favorite B-movies. Plus, Gunhed inspired many other medias like video games, and it also had a manga series released in parallel with the movie. But as expected, Gunhead's release in 1989 was a huge disaster in Japan and even more in America. So much so that not even the director wanted to have his name attached to the production and adopted the pseudonym Alan Smithy. That, for those who don't know, is the name that is adopted by the directors that are so disappointed with their own movies that they don't want to have their names attached to it. Famous examples of this is Dune from David Lynch. By the way, rest in peace, David Lynch. We will sorely miss this great director that left us recently, but in the past was a very common name to be used in this kind of cases. So Gunhed is another example of a movie that was so disastrous that not even the director wants to be related to it, which is a pity because besides having flaws, some movies deserve to be observed with a different eye to be able to see what they bring of value. And Gunhed brings a lot of value. And this is Gunhed from 1989. Have you ever watched it? What do you think? Unfortunately, this movie is not so easy to find to be able to watch it. There are some versions of it in the internet, sometimes not with a good quality, but there are Blu-ray versions that you can also buy. And if you are liking the content of Trashing with Gus, please don't forget to leave your beloved like in this video and also your wonderful subscription so we can keep trashing forever, alright? See you in the next trashing video, and bye-bye!